Welcome to Dreadtime Stories. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Your choice to watch this channel means a lot to me. Tonight, I have a spine-chilling collection of scary stories set in the rain for you to enjoy. So, let's get comfortable and allow the darkness overtake us. Willow Creek Park was new to us, a bit off the beaten path, but highly recommended by other parents in our neighborhood. As we approached, I could see why it was so popular. Playground was massive, with shiny new equipment and a soft, rubberized surface. Lily's eyes lit up at the sight of the towering play structure. "Can I go play, Dad?" she asked, practically bouncing with excitement. I nodded, settling onto a nearby bench to watch. At first, everything seemed normal. Lily joined a group of kids on the merry-go-round. Their laughter carried on the warm summer breeze. But as I watched, I noticed something odd. There were children I hadn't seen arrive, dressed in clothes that seemed old-fashioned. A boy in knickerbockers and a flat cap. A girl with long braids and a pinafore dress. They played alongside the modern kids, but something about their movements was off, almost ethereal. I blinked hard, convinced I was seeing things. When I looked again, the strange children were gone. I shook my head, blaming it on too little sleep and too much sun. But then I heard it. Beneath the shrieks and giggles of the living children, there was another layer of sound. Laughter that echoed as if from a great distance. Howls and shouts that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stood up, suddenly uneasy. "Lily," I called. "Time to go." She pouted, but started to make her way towards me. As she climbed down from the play structure, I saw her stop and tilt her head as if listening to someone. She nodded, then turned to me with wide eyes. "Dad?" she said as she reached me. "Did you know this used to be a school?" My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, sweetie?" The boy in the funny hat told me. He said there was a big fire a long time ago and lots of kids didn't make it out, but they still come here to play. I felt the color drain from my face. Grabbing Lily's hand, I hurried us towards the car, trying to keep my voice calm as I asked her more about what she'd seen and heard. Her story tumbled out as we drove home. The strange children had introduced themselves, told her about life in the early 1900s, and explained how they still played in the park that had once been their schoolyard. They were friendly, Lily insisted, just lonely and wanting to be remembered. That night, after Lily was asleep, I dove into research. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. In 1908, a devastating fire had indeed swept through the Willow Creek School. 37 children had perished, trapped in the upper floors. The school was never rebuilt, and eventually, the land was turned into a park. I was torn. Part of me wanted to dismiss the whole thing as an overactive imagination, both Lily's and my own. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we had experienced something truly supernatural. The next day, against my better judgment, we returned to the park. This time I was prepared, carrying an old class photo I'd found in the town archives. As Lily played, I watched closely, comparing the faces in the photo to the ghostly children I thought I'd seen. That's when it happened. A little girl, the one in the pinafore, appeared next to me on the bench. Her form was translucent, shimmering in the sunlight. She pointed to the photo in my hand, then to herself. "That's me," she said, her voice a whisper on the wind. "Margaret, we just want someone to remember us." I sat there, frozen, as Margaret told me about the fire, the fear, and the long years spent watching the world change around them while they remained the same. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I listened to her story, my heart breaking for these lost children. When she finished, Margaret smiled at me. "Thank you for listening," she said. "It's been so long since a grown-up could see us." With that, she vanished, leaving behind only the faint scent of smoke and a profound sense of sadness. In the days that followed, I grappled with what to do. I couldn't just ignore what had happened. Who would believe me? In the end, I decided to approach the local historical society. I shared what I'd learned, framing it as research I'd done on the park's history rather than a supernatural encounter. To my surprise, they were fascinated. Together, we worked to create a memorial for the lost children of Willow Creek School. A plaque was installed in the park, listing the names of those who had died and telling their story. we organized an annual Remembrance Day, ensuring that the tragedy would never be forgotten. Lily and I still visit the park regularly. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I catch glimpses of the ghostly children playing alongside the living. Their laughter still echoes on the wind, but it seems lighter now, more joyful. This experience changed me profoundly. It taught me that history is alive all around us, that the past can reach out and touch the present in unexpected ways. I learned that sometimes all a restless spirit needs is to be remembered, to have their story told. Now, whenever I pass an old building or a quiet park, I wonder what stories it might hold, what echoes of the past might still linger. And I always take a moment to remember those who came before, whose laughter might still be carried on the breeze. To anyone who visits a playground and feels a sudden chill or hears laughter that seems to come from nowhere, don't be afraid. Open your heart to the possibility that you might be in the presence of those who still long to play. Be children, to be remembered. And to the children of Willow Creek School, know that you are not forgotten. Your stories live on, your laughter still echoes, and in the hearts of those who remember, you will always have a place to play. It was a crisp autumn evening when Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her grandmother's number, which was odd considering Grandma Rose had passed away 6 months ago. Sarah answered, her hand trembling slightly. "Hello," she said hesitantly. What happened next sent chills down my spine. Sarah's face went pale, and she nearly dropped the phone. When she finally hung up, she turned to me with wide eyes. "It was Grandma Rose," she whispered. "She told me to look in the old oak tree behind her house. She said there's something I need to find." I was skeptical. It had to be a prank, or perhaps a glitch in the phone system. Sarah was insistent. The voice had been unmistakably her grandmother's, and there was an urgency in the message that she couldn't ignore. The next day, we drove to Grandma Rose's old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. It had been sitting empty since her passing, waiting to be sold. As we walked around to the backyard, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The ancient oak tree loomed before us, its gnarled branches reaching towards the sky. Sarah approached it slowly, running her hands along the rough bark. Suddenly, she gasped. Her fingers had found a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a key and a faded photograph. The picture showed a young woman who looked remarkably like Sarah, standing next to a man in a military uniform. On the back, in faded ink, was written, "Elizabeth and Thomas, 1943. "That's not my grandfather," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. The key, we discovered, fit an old roll-top desk in Grandma Rose's study. Inside, we found a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. As Sarah began to read, the truth of her family's past came to light. Elizabeth, it turned out, was Grandma Rose's older sister. She had fallen in love with Thomas, a soldier, during World War II. But Thomas was reported missing in action, presumed dead. Heartbroken, Elizabeth had taken her own life. The letters revealed a shocking twist. Thomas hadn't died. He had been captured and held as a prisoner of war. By the time he returned home, Elizabeth was gone. Devastated, he had left town, never knowing that Elizabeth had been pregnant when he shipped out. Grandma Rose had raised her sister's child, Sarah's mother, as her own, keeping the secret for decades to protect her family from the scandal and pain of the past. As we pieced together this family saga, strange things began to happen around the house. Objects moved on their own, doors opened and closed, and we could hear the faint sound of big band music playing from somewhere we could never quite pinpoint. One night, as we sat in the study poring over the letters, the temperature in the room suddenly dropped. A figure materialized in the corner. A young woman in 1940s dress, her eyes sad but her smile gentle. "Elizabeth," Sarah breathed, instinctively knowing it was her long-lost grandmother. The spirit nodded and pointed to the window. Outside, another figure appeared, a man in military uniform. Thomas. The two ghostly figures reached for each other, their hands finally meeting after decades of separation. As we watched, tears streaming down our faces, Elizabeth and Thomas smiled at us one last time before fading away. The room warmed, and we were left with a profound sense of In the days that followed, we tracked down Thomas's descendants, reuniting two branches of the family that had been separated for over 70 years. We shared the letters, the photographs, and the incredible story of love, loss, and a secret kept generation. This experience changed us profoundly. It taught us that family bonds can transcend even death, that love can echo through time, and that sometimes the greatest acts of love are those of sacrifice and protection. We decided to keep Grandma Rosa's house, turning it into a gathering place for our newly expanded family. Sometimes on quiet evenings, we can still hear the faint strains of 1940s music and catch glimpses of a young couple dancing in the shadows. To anyone who receives an unexpected message from the past, I urge you to listen. Family secrets, long buried, may be waiting to come to light, and in uncovering them, you might just find healing, understanding, connections you never knew existed. As for Sarah and me, we've become the keepers of our family's story. We've learned that every family has its ghosts, some metaphorical, some perhaps more literal. But by facing them with courage and compassion, we can lay them to rest and honor the love that has shaped our lives in ways we never knew. So if you ever find yourself in an old house, surrounded by whispers from the past, don't be afraid. Open your heart to the stories waiting to be told. For in the end, it's these connections to our past, to our loved ones, and to the secrets that have shaped us that make us who we are. And who knows, you might just find that love, like the spirits of Elizabeth and Thomas, has a way of enduring far beyond what we ever thought possible. It all started on a gloomy October afternoon, as I was sorting through Aunt Agatha's belongings. The house was a treasure trove of antiques, each with its own history and charm. But it was the grandfather clock in the study that caught my attention. Its ornate mahogany case and intricate brass fittings spoke of craftsmanship long forgotten. As I wound the clock, something strange happened. Instead of ticking forward, the hands began to move counterclockwise. I thought it was broken, but as I watched transfixed, the room around me began to change. Peeling wallpaper renewed itself, faded carpet regained its vibrant colors, and the musty smell of age was replaced by the scent of fresh flowers. Before my eyes, the study transformed into a scene from the past. A young woman, whom I recognized from old photos as Aunt Agatha in her youth, sat at the desk, penning a letter. Tears streamed down her face as she wrote. I couldn't help but move closer, drawn by an inexplicable force to read over her shoulder. The letter was addressed to a man named Thomas. Agatha was breaking off their engagement, citing family pressure and societal expectations. The anguish in her words was palpable, and I felt a pang of sadness for the great aunt I had never truly known. As quickly as it had appeared, the scene faded, and I found myself back in the present-day study. Clock's hands had returned to their normal position, ticking forward once more. Shaken but intrigued, I began to experiment. Each time I wound the clock counterclockwise, it transported me to a different moment in the house's history. I witnessed joyous celebrations, heated arguments, and quiet moments of despair. One scene particularly stood out. It was Christmas Eve, 1945. The house was filled with laughter and music as soldiers returned from war. In the corner stood a young man in uniform, his eyes fixed on Aunt Agatha. With a jolt, I realized it was Thomas, the man from the letter. Their eyes met across the room, decades of unspoken words passing between them. But before they could reach each other, the scene dissolved, leaving me with more questions than answers. As days turned into weeks, I became obsessed with the clock and the glimpses of the past it offered. I neglected my work, my friends, spending every spare moment winding back time to unravel the mysteries of my family's history. I saw the house change hands, witnessed the joys and sorrows of generations. But always, I returned to Agatha and Thomas, their story pulling at my heart. Through scattered scenes, I pieced together their tale, a love thwarted by circumstance, yet never forgotten. Then came the night that changed everything. As a thunderstorm raged outside, I wound the clock further back than ever before. The study disappeared, replaced by a scene of chaos. The house was on fire, flames licking at the walls. Through the smoke, I saw a figure struggling to reach the clock. It was Aunt Agatha, much older now. With trembling hands, she placed a letter inside the clock's case before collapsing. I tried to reach her, forgetting for a moment that I was merely an observer. As the scene faded, I was left with the acrid smell of smoke in my nostrils and a newfound determination. Back in the present, I carefully opened the clock's case. There, yellowed with age but intact, was the letter. It was addressed to me. Aunt Agatha's spidery handwriting explained everything. The clock had been in the family for generations, its ability to show the past a closely guarded secret. She had used it to relive her moments with Thomas, the love she had given up but never forgotten. In her final years, regretting her choice, she had tried to change the past, discovered that while the clock could show history, it couldn't alter it. Her letter to me was both a confession and a plea. She wanted me to learn from her mistake, to not let fear or expectation stand in the way of love. And she asked me to find Thomas's descendants, to pass on her apology and her enduring affection. The revelation hit me hard. I had been so caught up in the past that I had been neglecting my own present. Sarah, a woman I had been dating, had been trying to reach me for weeks, but I had been too preoccupied with the clock to respond. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and called her. As we talked, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I realized that while the past was fascinating, it was the present that truly mattered. In the weeks that followed, I fulfilled Aunt Agatha's last wish. I tracked down Thomas's grandson and shared with him the story of a love that had endured through time. It was a bittersweet moment, but one that brought closure to a tale decades in the making. As for the clock, I decided to donate it to a museum, along with Aunt Agatha's letter, explaining its unique properties. It was time for its story to be shared with the world. The experience changed me profoundly. I learned that while we can't change the past, we can learn from it. Every tick of a clock is a reminder to make the most of the present, to not let fear hold us back from living and loving fully. Now, whenever I hear the tick of a clock, I'm reminded of Aunt Agatha and the incredible journey through time she sent me on. It serves as a constant reminder to cherish every moment, to learn from history but not be bound by it. And sometimes on quiet nights, I swear I can hear the faint ticking of that old grandfather clock, echoing through time, telling the stories of all those who came before us, reminding us every second is precious. So if you ever come across an antique clock that seems to hold more than just the time, pay attention. You never know what stories it might tell, what lessons it might teach. After all, time is the greatest storyteller of all, and its tales are waiting for those willing to listen. After my third novel flopped, I was desperate for inspiration. My agent was breathing down my neck for a new manuscript. The words just wouldn't come. That's when I stumbled upon the antique typewriter in a dusty corner of a second-hand shop. It was a beautiful machine, a 1940s Remington with gleaming keys and a rich mahogany finish. The shop owner, an elderly man with knowing eyes, told me it had once belonged to the famous author, H.G. Wells. I laughed it off as a sales pitch, but something about the typewriter called to me. I bought it on impulse, hoping it might spark my creativity. That night, I set up the typewriter in my study. As I sat down to write, the keys began to move on their own. I jumped back, heart pounding, as words appeared on the page. "Hello, young writer. It seems you could use some assistance." Convinced I was hallucinating from lack of sleep, I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The words remained, crisp black ink on white paper. Boom. "Who are you?" I typed hesitantly. The response was immediate. "H.G. Wells at your service." Or rather, his ghost. It seems my creative spirit has become attached to this old typewriter. Couldn't believe it. I was having a conversation with the ghost of one of the greatest science fiction authors of all time. As we typed back and forth, Wells explained that he had unfinished stories he wanted to tell, ideas that had come to him after his death. He proposed a collaboration. He would dictate, and I would bring his words to life in the modern world. At first, I was skeptical. Was this some elaborate prank? A vivid dream brought on by desperation? But as Wells began to weave a tale of time travel and alien worlds, I found myself captivated. His prose was unmistakable, filled with the same wonder and imagination that had made his books classics. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a routine. Every night, I would sit at the typewriter and Wells would dictate. The story flowed effortlessly, perfect blend of his Victorian sensibilities and my modern perspective. We crafted a tale of a future Earth, ravaged by climate change, and a desperate mission to the past to prevent the catastrophe. As we worked, Wells shared anecdotes from his life, insights into his creative process, and his thoughts on how the world had changed since his time. It was like having a personal masterclass with a literary giant. But our collaboration wasn't without its challenges. Wells could be demanding, insisting on rewrites and arguing over plot points. There were nights when I wanted to throw the typewriter out the window, ghost and all. But even in our disagreements, I found myself growing as a writer, learning to defend my ideas and refine my craft. As we neared the end of the manuscript, I began to worry. What would happen when the book was finished? Would Wells move on to whatever awaited him in the afterlife? The thought of losing this incredible connection filled me with dread. On the night we typed the final words, I felt a shift in the air. Keys of the typewriter moved more slowly, as if Wells was savoring each keystroke. "Been a pleasure working with you, Alex," he typed. "You've helped an old ghost fulfill his final literary dream." Tears welled in my eyes as I realized this was goodbye. "Thank you," I typed back, "for everything. Will I ever hear from you again?" There was a long pause before the keys moved again. "Perhaps. The afterlife is full of surprises. But remember, my dear boy, the best stories come from within. You have the talent. You just needed a little push from beyond the veil." With that, the typewriter fell silent. I sat there for hours, hoping for one more message, but none came. Wells was gone. The book, published under both our names, was an instant success. Critics praised the seamless blend of classic and contemporary styles, unaware of the true nature of our collaboration. I became an overnight sensation, hailed as the voice of a new generation of science fiction writers. But success wasn't the most valuable thing I gained from my ghostly collaboration. Wells had rekindled my passion for writing, taught me to trust my instincts, and shown me that the most incredible stories can come from the most unexpected places. Now, years later, I still keep that old typewriter in my study. Sometimes late at night, I swear I can hear the faint clicking of keys, and when I'm stuck on a plot point or struggling with a character, I sit down at the Remington and ask, what would Wells do? More often than not, inspiration strikes, and I'm reminded that the greatest stories are born from a collaboration between the past and the present, the living and the dead, the real and the imagined. To all the struggling writers out there, remember this: inspiration can come from the most unlikely sources. Keep your mind open to the impossible. For in the realm of creativity, even ghosts can have something to say. And who knows, maybe there's an old typewriter out there waiting for you, with the spirit of a literary legend, ready to guide your fingers across the keys. After all, in the world of writing, anything is possible, even a collaboration that transcends the boundaries of life and death. Lake Shadowmere had always been a popular spot for summer getaways. Its crystal clear waters and surrounding pine forests made it a picturesque retreat from city life. When my wife Sarah suggested we rent a cabin there for a week, I jumped at the chance. We both needed a break from our hectic lives, and the serene lake seemed perfect. The first few days were idyllic. We swam, hiked, and spent evenings on the porch watching the sunset paint the lake in hues of gold and pink. But on the third night, things took a sinister turn. I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but as I listened, I could make out words. Betrayed, forgotten, revenge. The voice seemed to be coming from the lake itself, carried on the mist that had begun to roll in. Curious and a bit unnerved, I stepped outside. The mist was thick, obscuring the water's edge. As I peered into the darkness, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, translucent and glowing with an eerie blue light, was rising from the lake. It was a woman, her long hair floating around her as if she were still underwater. Her eyes, when they met mine, were filled with a mixture of sorrow and rage. She pointed at me, voice now clear and ringing with power. "You bear his face," she said, her words dripping with venom. "The face of the one who betrayed me." Confused and terrified, I tried to speak, but no words came out. The spirit glided closer, the water churning around her. 100 years ago," she continued, "a man with your face promised to marry me, but he lied. He left me for another and laughed as I drowned in my despair. Now, you will pay for his sins." I felt an invisible force pulling me towards the lake. My feet scraped against the dock as I struggled against the spirit's power. Just as I thought I would be dragged into the depths, Sarah's voice cut through the night. "Daniel, wake up." I jolted awake, gasping for air. Sarah was shaking me, concern etched on her face. "You were having a nightmare," she said. "You were thrashing and mumbling about drowning." Relieved but shaken, I told Sarah about my dream. She listened patiently, then suggested we go into town and learn more about the lake's history. Perhaps there was some truth to my nightmare. At the local library, we discovered a tragic story from a century ago. A young woman named Elizabeth Blackwood had indeed drowned in Lake Shadowmere. She had been engaged to a man named Daniel Harper, my great-grandfather and namesake. The resemblance in the old photographs was uncanny. The librarian, an elderly woman with knowing eyes, told us that Elizabeth's death had been ruled a suicide, but rumors persisted that she had been murdered. My great-grandfather had married another woman shortly after, fueling suspicions. "Some say her spirit still haunts the lake," the librarian whispered, "seeking revenge on any who bear the Harper name." That night, unable to sleep, I stood on the dock staring at the misty waters. I felt a deep sense of guilt for a crime I hadn't committed, but for which I was being held responsible. Suddenly, the mist began to coalesce, taking the form of Elizabeth. This time, however, her eyes held more sorrow than anger. "I'm sorry," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them, "for what he did to you. It wasn't right." Elizabeth's form flickered, surprise replacing the anguish on her face. "I'm not him," continued, "but I'm sorry for the pain my family caused you. You deserved better." As I spoke, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The sins of the past, the guilt of generations, seemed to dissipate into the night air. Elizabeth's spirit began to change. The rage melted away, replaced by a peaceful luminescence. She smiled, a sad, that gentle smile, and nodded once before dissolving back into the mist. The lake, which had seemed so menacing before, now lapped gently at the shore. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of tranquility. In the days that followed, the lake seemed different. Locals commented on how the water appeared clearer, the air fresher. Some even claimed that the century-old curse had been lifted. As for me, I left Lake Shadowmere with a profound understanding of the power of acknowledgement and apology, even for wrongs I hadn't personally committed. The weight of the past can haunt us, but facing it head-on can bring peace not only to restless spirits, but to our own souls as well. Now, years later, I often think back to that night on the dock. It taught me that the sins of our ancestors can ripple through time, affecting generations to come. But it also showed me that healing is possible, that even the most vengeful spirit can find peace when offered sincere remorse and understanding. Lake Shadowmere is a popular vacation spot once again. Families laugh and play on its shores, unaware of the drama that unfolded beneath its placid surface. Sometimes, on misty nights, I like to think that Elizabeth watches over the lake, no longer seeking revenge, but ensuring that such betrayals never happen again. To anyone visiting a place with a troubled history, remember, the past may not be as buried as we think. Sometimes, all it takes is a willingness to listen, to acknowledge, and to apologize, to set both the living and the dead free from the chains of history. And if you ever find yourself at Lake Shadowmere, take a moment to stand on the shore and whisper a thank you to Elizabeth. For in finding her peace, she allowed countless others to find theirs as well. Millbrook Station had been abandoned for decades, a relic of a bygone era when rail was king. The town council kept it standing out of a sense of nostalgia, hiring me to keep vandals and squatters at bay. Little did they know, the station already had plenty of residents, just not living ones. I first noticed something was amiss on my third night. As I made my rounds, I heard the unmistakable sound of a steam whistle echoing through the empty halls. Rushing to the platform, I expected to see a train, but the tracks were as empty and rusted as ever. That's when I saw them, ghostly figures milling about the platform, dressed in clothes from various eras, men in fedoras and women in poodle skirts, soldiers in World War II uniforms, and even a few in Victorian garb. They all seemed to be waiting, checking pocket watches or peering down the tracks expectantly. At first, I was terrified, but as I watched, I realized these spirits weren't menacing. They were lost, confused, eternally waiting for trains that had stopped running long ago. Over the next few weeks, I began to interact with them. Most didn't seem to realize they were dead, convinced that their train was just running late. Others knew their fate but couldn't bear to move on, clinging to the hope that their journey wasn't over. There was old Mr. Jameson, who had been station master here for 40 years and couldn't bring himself to leave his post. Young Sally, in her best Sunday dress, forever waiting for a train that would take her to meet her fiancé before he shipped out to war. And little Tommy, clutching his teddy bear, separated from his parents in the chaos of a long-ago evacuation. Their stories broke my heart, and I found myself wanting to help them. But how do you assist those who are no longer among the living? I started small, playing old music on a portable radio to keep them company. I'd read out train schedules from the 1940s, giving them a sense of routine. For those who knew they were deceased, I'd sit and listen to their stories, offering what comfort I could. But it wasn't enough. They were still trapped, unable to move on. That's when I had an idea. I approached the town council with a plan to turn the old station into a museum. It took some convincing, but eventually they agreed. We restored the main hall, filled it with artifacts and photographs from the station's heyday, and even got an old steam engine to display on a short stretch of restored track. The night before the grand opening, I gathered all the spirits on the platform. "Your train hasn't come," I told them gently, "because this isn't your final destination. It's just a stop along the way." I explained about the museum. Other stories would be told and remembered. "You've all been waiting so long," I said. "It's time for your final journey." As I spoke, something miraculous happened. A ghostly train began to materialize on the tracks, glowing with an otherworldly light. One by one, the spirits began to board, each turning to give me a smile or a wave before disappearing into the carriages. Mr. Jameson was the last to board, pausing at the door. "Thank you, Tom," he said, his voice echoing strangely, "for being the best station master this place has seen since, well, me." With a wink and a tip of his hat, he stepped aboard. The train gave one long, mournful whistle and began to move. As it pulled away, it faded from view, taking with it the souls who had waited so long for their final journey. The next day, the museum opened to great fanfare. As visitors marveled at the restored station and pored over the historical displays, I couldn't help but smile. The spirits might be gone. Their stories lived on. In the years since, I've continued to work at the station-turned-museum. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear the faint sound of a steam whistle or catch a glimpse of a figure in old-fashioned clothes. But it's fleeting, like a half-remembered dream. This experience changed me profoundly. It taught me that sometimes the kindest thing we can do for others, and for ourselves, is to help them move on. It showed me that history isn't just about dates and facts, but about the lives and stories of those who came before us. To anyone who finds themselves in an old, abandoned place, I urge you to listen closely. You might hear the whispers of those left behind, those still waiting for their chance to move on. And if you do, remember that sometimes all it takes is a little understanding, a little kindness, to help a lost soul find their way. As for me, I'll always be grateful for my time as the caretaker of Millbrook Station's ghosts. They taught me about patience, about hope, and about the enduring power of human connection, even beyond the grave. So the next time you're in a train station, take a moment to look around. Among the hustle and bustle of travelers, you might just spot someone who's been waiting a very long time for their train to come in. And who knows? Maybe you'll be the one to help them on their way. When I took over the management of the Opera House, I was warned about the strange occurrences. Mysterious music in empty halls, props moving on their own, and the occasional glimpse of a figure in 19th century dress. I dismissed these tales as superstition and folklore, focused instead on revitalizing the aging theater. But as weeks passed, I couldn't ignore the unexplainable events. Sheet music would appear on stands overnight, filled with compositions no one recognized. Lights would flicker during rehearsals, always at the same point in certain areas. And late at night, when I thought I was alone in the building, I would hear the most haunting soprano voice echoing through the corridors. It all came to a head one stormy night as I was locking up. The voice I'd heard so often suddenly filled the main auditorium. Following the sound, I found myself standing center stage, face to face with a translucent figure of a woman in an elaborate Victorian gown. She was beautiful, with dark hair piled high and eyes that seemed to hold a century of sorrow. When she spoke, her voice resonated with an otherworldly quality. "Monsieur," she said, "I am Marguerite Gautier. I have waited so long for someone to hear me." Trembling, I listened as Marguerite told her tale. She had been the rising star of the opera in 1887, poised to perform the lead in a new production that would have cemented her place in history. But on opening night, tragedy struck. Terrible fire broke out, and Marguerite, trapped in her dressing room, perished before she could ever take the stage. "My final performance," she lamented, "forever unsung." In that moment, I understood. This wasn't just a haunting. It was an artist's unfulfilled dream, a passion so strong it had tethered her spirit to this place for over a century. "What if," I suggested, my voice shaking, "we could give you that performance now?" Marguerite's eyes widened, a spark of hope igniting in their ghostly depths. Over the next weeks, I threw myself into researching the lost opera. I scoured archives, contacted music historians, and pieced together the score from fragments found in old storage rooms. All the while, Marguerite guided me, humming melodies and correcting notes that had been lost to time. As word spread of our unique project, it caught the attention of the media and opera enthusiasts worldwide. We billed it as a restoration of a lost classic, never revealing the true nature of our ghostly collaborator. The night of the performance arrived. The opera house was packed, the air electric with anticipation. As the curtain rose, I held my breath, praying that Marguerite would be able to make herself heard. I needn't have worried. From the moment the first note sounded, Marguerite's voice soared above the orchestra, clear and powerful. The audience sat in stunned silence, then erupted in rapturous applause. They couldn't see her. They could certainly hear her. A voice from another time, finally singing the aria she was always meant to perform. As the final notes faded, I saw Marguerite center stage, taking her bow. Tears streamed down her translucent cheeks as she smiled at me. "Thank you," she mouthed before slowly fading away, her spirit finally at peace. The performance became legendary. Critics hailed it as a once-in-a-lifetime event, puzzling over the mysterious soprano whose voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The Palais Garnier saw a resurgence in popularity, with people flocking to the opera house in hopes of experiencing something magical. In the years since, the strange occurrences have ceased. The phantom of the opera house, having given her final performance, has moved on. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear the faint echoes of Marguerite's aria, a reminder of the night we helped a ghost fulfill her dream. This experience changed me profoundly. It taught me that music has the power to transcend time, space, and even death. It showed me that the passion of an artist can be so strong that it leaves an imprint on the world long after they're gone. Now, whenever I walk through the halls of the Palais Garnier, I'm acutely aware of the history that surrounds us. Every creaking floorboard, every whisper in the wings, could be the echo of a story waiting to be told, a performance longing to be given. To anyone who finds themselves in an old theater, feeling the weight of history around them, I say this: listen closely. You never know when you might hear the whispers of the past, or when you might be called upon to help a lost soul complete their magnum opus. And to Marguerite, wherever her spirit may now rest, I say thank you. Thank you for reminding me of the true power of music. and for allowing me to be a part of the most extraordinary performance we'll ever witness. The phantom of our opera house may be gone, but her song lives on, a testament to the enduring power of art and the human spirit. The locket came to me on my 30th birthday, a week after my grandmother's funeral. It was a beautiful thing, oval-shaped and made of gold, with a large, blood-red ruby set in its center. As I held it in my palm, I felt an inexplicable chill run down my spine. "It's been in the family for generations," my mother said as she handed it to me. "Gran wanted you to have it." I should have known something was amiss when I saw the relief in her eyes as the locket changed hands. At first, everything seemed fine. I wore the locket to work, proud to carry a piece of family history with me. But then, the strange occurrences began. It started small, a missed alarm, a spilled coffee, flat tire. But as the days went on, the misfortunes grew more serious. I lost a major client at work. My girlfriend of 3 years left me unexpected. I narrowly escaped a car accident that totaled my vehicle. Through it all, the locket seemed to grow heavier around my neck, the ruby gleaming with an unnatural light. Desperate for answers, I began researching the locket's history. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. The locket had come into our family in the late 1800s when my great-great-grandfather, a British soldier in India, had taken it from the body of a dying holy man. The holy man, with his last breath, cursed the locket and all who would possess it. As I dug deeper, I uncovered a trail of tragedy following the locket through the generation. Great-great-grandfather died in a hunting accident shortly after returning to England. His son, my great-grandfather, lost everything in the stock market crash and took his own life. My grandfather disappeared under mysterious circumstances when my mother was just a child. Each owner of the locket had met with misfortune, their lives unraveling in a series of increasingly terrible events. And now, it seemed it was my turn. Determined to break the curse, I sought out experts in the occult, traveled to India to consult with spiritual leaders, and even attempted to destroy the locket. Nothing worked. The gold wouldn't melt, the ruby wouldn't crack, and the clasp refused to open. My obsession with the locket began to consume me. I lost my job, my friends drifted away, and my health began to deteriorate. The ruby seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and at night, I swore I could hear whispers emanating from it, speaking in a language I didn't understand. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I received a letter. It was from a distant cousin I'd never met, responding to one of my many inquiries about our family history. She had in her possession a diary belonging to our great-great-grandmother, the wife of the soldier who had first acquired the locket. The diary revealed a shocking truth. The locket hadn't been stolen from a dying holy man. It had been given willingly, part of a sacred ritual. The curse was actually a powerful protection spell, meant to guard against evil. But my great-great-grandfather, not understanding its purpose, had feared it, and passed that fear down through the generations. The misfortunes that had befallen our family weren't caused by the locket. They were what the locket had been protecting us from. Without it, our fates would have been far worse. With this new understanding, I approached the locket differently. Instead of trying to be rid of it, I embraced it. I learned to listen to the whispers, recognizing them as warnings rather than threats. The ruby's glow became a comfort rather than a source of fear. As I accepted the locket's true nature, my luck began to change. I found a new job, better than the one I'd lost. I mended relations with friends and family. I even met someone new, someone who understood and appreciated the incredible legacy I carried. Now, years later, the locket still hangs around my neck. It's no longer a burden, but a reminder of the strength and resilience of my family line. The ruby glows warmly, constant companion, protector. I've made it my mission to uncover more of my family's history, to understand the true nature of the power we've carried for generations. Each discovery brings new insights, not just into the locket, but into myself and my place in the world. To anyone who might find themselves in possession of a family heirloom with a dark reputation, I offer this advice. Don't be too quick to judge. What seems like a curse might be a blessing in disguise. Take the time to understand your legacy, to uncover the truths hidden by time and misunderstanding. Our family's story is far from over. Each generation adds a new chapter to the tale of the Crimson Locket. And though I don't know what the future holds, I face it without fear, knowing that I carry with me the strength and protection of all those who came before. So if you ever see a man with a golden locket and a ruby that seems to glow with an inner light, know that you're looking at more than just a piece of jewelry. You're seeing a legacy, protection, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as curses. The Crimson Locket is more than an heirloom. It's a testament to the power of understanding our past and embracing our heritage, no matter how daunting it might seem at first glance. When I purchased the dilapidated mill, my intention was to convert it into a trendy restaurant. The old stone building, with its weathered wooden water wheel and rustic charm, seemed perfect, the farm-to-table concept I had in mind. Little did I know that I was buying more than just property. I was inheriting a century-old tragedy. The strange occurrences began almost immediately. Ghouls would go missing, only to reappear in odd places. The water wheel would creak and groan in the middle of the night, despite there being no wind or water to move it. And always, there was the faint smell of smoke, as if something was perpetually on the verge of catching fire. It was during my third week of renovations that I first saw him. I was alone in the mill, measuring a wall for demolition, when I felt a sudden chill. Turning around, I found myself face to face with a man dressed in 19th century work clothes, his form translucent and shimmering in the dusty air. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The ghost, for what else could he be, looked at me with sad, hollow eyes. "Please," said, his voice echoing as if from a great distance, "don't let them forget." Before I could respond, he vanished, leaving behind only the lingering scent of smoke. Shaken but intrigued, I began researching the mill's history. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. In 1887, a young worker named Silas Granger had died in a terrible accident. Fire had broken out, and Silas had been trapped between the giant grinding stones, unable to escape as the flames engulfed the mill. The mill had been rebuilt, but Silas's death had been all but forgotten, tragedy lost to time. Over the next few weeks, Silas's ghost appeared to me several times. Each encounter revealed more of his story. His dreams of saving enough money to buy his own farm, his love for a girl in town he had been too shy to court, terror of his final moments trapped in the inferno. I found myself abandoning my restaurant plan, instead focusing on uncovering every detail of Silas's life and the history of the mill. The more I learned, the more I felt a connection to this lost soul, trapped for over a century, in the place of his death. One night, as I sat among piles of old documents and photographs, Silas appeared again. This time, he seemed more solid, more present. "You've listened," he said, a hint of a smile on his ghostly face. "For so long, I thought no one would ever hear my story." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "Silas," I said, "I want to help you find peace. What can I do?" His eyes, filled with a century of sorrow, met mine. "I just want to be remembered," he said, "to know that my life, short as it was, meant something." In that moment, I knew what I had to do. Over the next few months, I worked tirelessly to transform the mill into a museum dedicated to the history of Millbrook and its workers. I created exhibits showcasing the lives of those who had toiled there, with a special section devoted to Silas and the tragic fire of 1887. On the night before the museum's grand opening, Silas appeared to me one last time. He stood by the restored water wheel, looking more at peace than I had ever seen him. "Thank you, Jack," he said, his voice strong and clear. "You've given me more than just remembrance. You've given me rest." As I watched, Silas's form began to fade, a smile spreading across his face. Just before he disappeared completely, I saw a bright light behind him, and for a brief moment, the figure of a young woman reaching out her hand. The next day, as visitors poured into the museum, marveling at the restored mill and poring over the exhibits, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Silas's story touched many hearts, ensuring that his life and the lives of all the mill workers would be remembered for generations to come. In the years since, I've continued to run the museum, always searching for new stories to tell, new lives to commemorate. The ghostly occurrences have ceased, but sometimes on quiet evenings, I swear I can hear the faint sound of the water wheel turning and smell a whiff of wood smoke on the air. This experience changed me profoundly. It taught me that history is more than just dates and events. It's about the lives of individuals, each with their own hopes, dreams, and stories. It showed me that sometimes the greatest peace we can offer is simply to listen and to remember. To anyone who finds themselves in an old building with a long history, I urge you to listen closely. You might hear the whispers of those who came before, their stories waiting to be told. And if you do, take the time to listen, to understand, and to share those stories with others. As for me, I'll always be grateful for my encounter with Silas. He taught me about the power of memory, the importance of honoring the past, and the profound impact we can have on others, even those separated from us by the veil of death. So the next time you pass an old mill or factory, take a moment to think about those who worked there. Their stories may be waiting to be heard, their spirits longing for recognition, and who knows, you might just be the one to help them find their long-awaited peace. It was supposed to be a simple affair, a barbecue at my parents' old farmhouse to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. Relatives from all over the country had flown in for the occasion. The air was filled with the scent of grilled burgers and the sound of laughter as cousins caught up and old stories were retold. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, I noticed something odd. A mist was rolling in from the fields, unusually thick for a summer evening. It swirled around our feet, bringing with it a chill that made me shiver despite the warm air. That's when I saw him, my grandfather, standing at the edge of the property. He was exactly as I remembered him from my childhood, down to the worn flannel shirt and the pipe clenched between his teeth. The only problem was, Grandpa Joe had been dead for 20 years. I blinked hard, convinced I was seeing things. But when I opened my eyes, not only was Grandpa Joe still there, but he was joined by other familiar faces. Aunt Sarah, who had passed away last winter. Cousin Tommy, lost in a car accident in his teens. Even great-grandma Evelyn, who I had only ever seen in old photographs. As I stood there, frozen in shock, I realized that no one else seemed to notice our ghostly guests. The living continued their conversations, oblivious to the spectral gathering forming around us. Grandpa Joe caught my eye and nodded, a small smile playing on his translucent lips. He beckoned me over, with a gesture I remembered so well from my childhood. On shaky legs, I approached him. "It's good to see you, boy," he said, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "We've got some unfinished business to attend to." Before I could respond, more spirits materialized. I recognized faces from old family albums, relatives I had never met but whose stories I had grown up hearing. They mingled with the living, their ethereal forms passing through solid bodies unnoticed. As I watched, bewildered, I began to understand. Old arguments were being settled, long-held grudges released. Aunt Sarah apologized to her estranged daughter for years of misunderstanding. Cousin Tommy forgave his father for the harsh words spoken in anger just before his fatal accident. Great-grandma Evelyn revealed the location of a long-lost family heirloom, ending decades of speculation and blame. The air crackled with emotion, joy, sorrow, regret, and most of all, love. I found myself acting as a mediator between the worlds, relaying messages from the dead to the living. At first, my family members looked at me like I had lost my mind, but as I revealed things only the deceased could have known, disbelief turned to awe and tearful acceptance. My own moment came when Grandpa Joe pulled me aside. "I'm sorry I never got to say goodbye," said, his hand resting on my shoulder with a weight that felt impossibly real. "I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become." Tears streamed down my face as years of unresolved grief finally found release. We talked about everything I had wanted to tell him over the years. Career, my marriage, children. He listened with that patient smile I remembered so well, offering words of wisdom and encouragement. As the night wore on, I noticed the spirits beginning to fade. They gathered together, their forms becoming more transparent. Each passing moment, Grandpa Joe turned to me one last time. "Remember, Michael," he said, his voice growing faint, "family is the most precious thing we have. It transcends even death. Take care of each other and know that we're always watching over you." With those words, the ghostly gathering vanished, leaving behind only the lingering scent of Grandpa's pipe smoke and a profound sense of peace. The living guests began to stir, as if waking from a dream. Many were wiping away tears, looking confused but somehow lighter. Conversations buzzed with reconciliations and revelations, the air thick with a newfound understanding and forgiveness. As for me, I stood there in the misty twilight, forever changed. I had been given a gift, the chance to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, to help heal wounds that had festered for generations. In the years that followed, our family grew closer than ever before. The stories of that night became legend, whispered around campfires and holiday dinners. Some believed, some were skeptical, but all agreed that something profound had happened at that reunion. I never saw our ghostly relatives again, but I felt their presence in the renewed bonds of our family. Every reunion after that held a special significance, celebration not just of the living, but of all those who had come before us. To this day, whenever I visit my parents' farmhouse, I find myself looking out over those misty fields at twilight, and sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a whiff of pipe smoke on the breeze, reminding me that the love of family truly is eternal. So if you ever find yourself at a family gathering and feel a sudden chill in the air, pay attention. You never know who might be stopping by for one last reunion, one final chance to say all the things left unsaid. After all, in the tapestry of family, every thread is precious, even those that stretch beyond the veil of death. We hope you enjoyed this chilling tale. If it sent shivers down your spine, give us a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite part? Don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a scare. Until next time, stay spooky and remember, sometimes the darkest shadows hide the most terrifying secret.